In this lesson, we'll take a closer look into CATMotion. So in this scene file, we have our final rig, only in order to work with CATMotion, I've made sure to disable additive to setup pose. And then at that point, we could go ahead and save this out as a CATMotion preset. So I've already done that, and I've made sure to add this file to your project files folder. Okay, so we're ready to now take a look at CATMotion. Let's go ahead and move to our CATMotion layer here and enter animation mode just to see our creature now walk. So that's really cool. Now you can see we're getting a lot of movement in the knees, and this is simply because of our upnode objects. So no worries. We could always go in, remove the cat layer, and delete these up objects. Remember, if we ever need to bring them back, it's just a matter of selecting our leg, heading over to the motion panel, and then at that point we could go ahead and recreate the node. But we won't need it here. I think it's going to give us a much better result now when we apply the walk. Let's go ahead and take a look. Great. Alright, so now that we have this really cool walk, let's go ahead and learn how to make it even cooler by using the CATMotion editor. You can access it by clicking on this paw icon. Alright, so there are a lot of properties here, and we're just going to go ahead and cover all of the essentials. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the top category, and this is what we'd use to save any presets out after we have refined the walk. So we can go ahead and use the save icon to do that. And then to the left of it, we can use this to load in any presets. Take a look here at the top right. Notice we can go ahead and work with layers, and you can create a new layer here. And then you could start to edit the timing of your motion layers by moving over to your curve editor, clicking on this icon. I'll now remove this layer by using the delete icon. Alright, so that's a look at the preset category. Let's go ahead and move to global. So this is what we'd use to change the timing of our walk and our walk stride. So at the top, our motion range, this works when we start to use a path node to have our character walk along a trajectory. So we'll take a look at that. But notice underneath our stride parameters, this is what we would use to change the timing of our walk. So right now, the creature's walking pretty fast because by the time we get to frame 25, that means that the creature has walked one loop. So if we wanted a slower walk, we could always set this to, let's say, a value of 40. And now watch this. When we play back the animation now, our creature does a really cool walk, and it has a good feeling of weight. If you feel that that is a little bit too slow, you could always change this by simply decreasing this value. So maybe a value of 30 would look nicer. I think so. Now as we change this max step time, that also changes our velocity parameter. We can't edit this at all. This is just a way to keep track of the velocity after we have edited the step time. Now just as we can change our step timing, we could also change our stride length. So right now it's set to 160. We can increase this by setting it to 200 for a longer stride. Or if we wanted our character to tippy toe, we can always set this to, let's say, 70. So that's pretty funny looking. I might go ahead and set this back to 160. I like how the feet looked. So I think that's going to work out well. Now, direction. This is a way to have our creature walk in a diagonal direction. It's not going to change the direction the creature faces. It's only its walk direction. So if I were to go ahead and set this to a high mount of, let's say, 200, you could see that the creature is now going to start walking in that direction diagonally. Right now, it's just walking in place, because of our walk mode. I'm going to go ahead and set this to walk in line so you could see this directional movement. All right, great. Now, if I were to go ahead and start to bring this down some, all right, you could now see that, again, the creature is starting to move diagonally. So he's starting to walk back. So that's pretty cool. If I were to set this to negative 130 and hit play, take a look at that. So now we have a mirrored look. Okay, great. So that's basically how we can go ahead and work with the directional tool. Now gradient, let me go ahead and zero out the direction here. Gradient is what we would use to have the creature walk upward diagonally. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this, and now you can see that the creature walks up at a slant. Later we'll learn how to have this walk conform to an object. But if we wanted to fake that, we can go ahead and use this gradient property. I'll go ahead and zero this out. We've taken a look at our walk modes. The last one we'll want to look at is how to have the creature walk along a shape. But before we get to that, I'd like to go ahead and point out these bottom properties. So preserve character shape is what we'd use to have our character or creature conform to our path. So if this is set to 0, our creature would then curve along the path in a very flexible way. Now this is useful for creatures with horizontal vertebrae, so a quadruped. So again, setting it to 0 will have the creature curve, but if we were to set this back to 1, that's not going to happen. You could also blend between retargeted data using this last option. Now, since retargeting deserves its own course, I'm not going to go ahead and dedicate any time to that in this introductory series. But I wanted to show you that option here. All right, so let's say we go ahead and have our creature walk along a path, because we'll need to do that in order to access our footprint settings in the next category. So what I'll do is quickly go in and create a path. Let's head over to our Create panel, and we'll create a line shape, and I'll just make this pretty basic. Okay, great. So now, if we were to go ahead and choose Path Node and select on the path, take a look. Our creature is still going to walk in place, but it's now tied to the center of this object. So how can we have it move along the path? Well, what we'll need to do is create a path node that is tied to this with a path animation controller. And then at that point, we could go ahead and tie the creature to that node. So let me go ahead and undo this back. We will go back to Create, and we'll create a point helper. So underneath Standard here, let's go ahead and create a quick point helper, exit the tool, and now with it selected, I'll head over to Animation, Constraint, and add a Path Constraint. All right, so we have some animation going from our start time to the end time, okay, as we should expect. So now, let's go ahead and choose the path node, which is our helper. Okay, great. So watch this. Our creature is now walking on a wall and walking backwards. So this is all a matter of reorienting this object. So I'll go ahead and do that now. If we were to go to our rotate tool, we can make sure we have angle snap enabled. We could go ahead and rotate this up about negative 90 degrees. All right, great. So at least the creature now is walking upright, but he's walking backwards. If you like him to moonwalk, you most certainly can keep it this way, but chances are you'll want him to walk properly. So at this point, we'll just go ahead and rotate that same object, and we could do that about negative 180 degrees to flip him around. Okay, great. Now you can see that the creature is not quite following the orientation of this path. In order to do that, again, it's a matter of changing a setting on the node object itself. So with it selected underneath our motion panel, we'd want to make sure follow is enabled. And now you can see our our creature is now walking sideways, and this is actually really cool stuff. It's doing a little fun shuffle. But if we want to fix this, again, it's just a matter of rotating this object. So I'll go ahead and start to rotate about 90 degrees or so to fix this. And there we have it. Now, once we start to use this, once we start to work with a path object, we are not able to go in and start to adjust our start or our step time and our stride length, because now we're dealing with footsteps. So we have to do this another way, and that is where our limb phase settings come into play. All right. So again, we've learned how to work with our walk modes, and we've learned how to create a variation in our creature's walk using our max step time and stride length. We've also taken a look at how to change our creature's path direction. Okay, and again, we cannot use any of these properties when we are using a path node, so that's just something to keep in mind. And then we've taken a look at these last two properties. So let's go ahead and now learn how to have this path conform to a surface. We could do that by using the Pick Ground tool. So if I were to go to the Create panel and create a plane, we can make sure the segment length and width is set to 20, so we have enough topology here to work with to have our creature walk nicely along the surface in a smooth way. So now go ahead and exit the tool. We can head over to our Modify panel. Let's go ahead and convert this to an editable poly. And now going to our vertex sub-object level, we can enable soft select, select one of our points, increase the fall off here. And then we could go ahead and translate this up. All right, so at this point we are good to go. Let's go ahead and move this closer to our path and take a look. If we were to go in and choose Pick Ground, we could go ahead and pick our surface, and now our path is going to conform to this. So as we hit play, you can see our creature is now starting to walk up the surface. Very cool stuff. I love working with this. If you ever want to revert back, you could always use Reset, but chances are you don't want to do that. So I'll go ahead and now choose Pick Ground, so we could go ahead and grab our surface again. All right, now the settings before this to the left, this allows us to decide when we would like our creature to stop walking. So right now our range is set to 100, and that is based off of our range here. So if I were to go ahead and add some more frames to this by simply holding down Control-Alt and dragging on our track bar, and then go back to limb phases and turn on step mass, you'll see that now the creature is going to stop walking, but at the same time we may get a little bit of a weird type of behavior because of this surface controlling our creature's direction. All right, so if I were to go ahead and choose Reset, now you'll see that that's no longer an issue, and the creature is going to start coming to a stop. Okay, so what I'd also like to show you is a way we can go in and start to edit our footsteps. I'm actually going to remove this surface. And let's take a look here. Let's go ahead and bring our range back to frame 100. And I'll go in and I'll offset one of our footsteps, just bringing this out. You can see that now our creature is going to step in that very spot. If we were to choose delete, all of these changes will be saved. What that means is that we no longer have a way to edit the animation. The great thing is that when we choose create, it will regenerate those footsteps for us, keeping those changes. Now the properties underneath, this is just a way to go in and edit our footsteps. So we can go ahead and start to offset them by using those properties. So you can see our creature's doing a small little hop here, which I don't quite like too much, so I might go ahead and start to change this back. Should have been to about value of 0.25 or so. Okay, so he's still doing the hop here. I'll go ahead and make sure that the left leg is set to 25, or 0.25 that is. And the right leg set to negative 0.25. And now we get back to our walk. Beautiful. Okay, so the last few categories are what we would use to directly change the walk's behavior. So watch this. When we start to expand these hub groups, we now have a curve we can use, very similar to what we see in our curve editor, only now we'd use this curve editor to start enhancing our walk. All right, so just taking a look at a few options here, we could go ahead and copy and paste our values. We could go ahead and start to scale them. So you can see that right now I'm starting to scale the first pelvis group. That's the first pelvis that we made. And that will start to adjust the pelvis roll. If you want to, you could always reset your settings. And then you can go ahead and keep track of how everything flows in your curve editor from here. If you need to zoom into your curve, you can go ahead and use the Zoom Extent tool. We could also offset our curve horizontally or vertically by using these offset channels. Okay, I might reset this back. And now the timing here, this is what we'd use to change the timing of the selected key. If you want to quickly toggle through your selection, you could go ahead and use these arrows here. Then at that point, you could start to use the time field to delay or speed up your timing. And then you could use the value to change the value of that key, as you normally would in your curve editor. Notice here you could go ahead and edit the tangent. And that's going to create a funny looking result. So I might go ahead and zero this out. Take a look at what this does. So it's going to create a slight pause. If you don't quite like that, of course you could go ahead and reset your settings to revert back. And then you can change your tangent length from here. Now chances are you may not want to adjust the length too much to a point where you kind of zero this out, because that's going to lead to a very sharp key, and it'll almost appear as if you're getting a very heavy hit on the track that you are editing. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'll go ahead and set this back to the default by using reset. There are a few options that are grayed out right now because these are what we'd use for our limbs. So if I were to show you that, we could go to our legs, click on one of our channels here, let's say the twist, and now notice we can start to use these channels that are now accessible. So if we were to click on this icon here, what this is going to do is allow us to edit each leg separately. You can see the blue is for the left side and the red is for the right. If we want to connect these together, we could go ahead and use this lock tool. So now as we start to use these, you can see that both will start to move. But this is the same thing as turning off this independent mode. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to you. Now what I'd like to do is use this to fix the creature's head animation, because I don't quite like how much the head is moving. I'd like to dim that down a bit. So that means that we need to go to our last pelvis hub group. If you rename your object from the modify panel, if you go ahead and rename this object, it will not update in your editor. All right, but it's very easy to know what hub group you're working with. I mean, we know that the first hub group was for the pelvis, the second for the chest, so the third is going to be for our head. So I'll go ahead and expand this group. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and choose the twist and roll channels and edit those. I'll simply use scale to bring these down a bit more so that the head doesn't move as much. And now, let's go ahead and take a look at this. If we were to go ahead and close this out and hit play, what you'll notice that now our character's head doesn't move as much. So I kind of like that result a bit better. I might even go to this footstep here and just bring that in a little bit more to keep the walk consistent. Now, something else I'd like to point out to you before we end this lesson is just a way to edit the timing of your walk. If I were to go back to the motion panel here and select on, let's say, our cat parent node, going back to our editor and going back to global, so you can see that here we could go ahead and start to have the timing of our walk matched to the timing of our path animation. So if I were to go ahead and set this last key to, let's say, 130, I'll go ahead and just drag it there. We would then want to update this timing to 130. Okay, so notice everything matches well, and now our creature is starting to walk a little bit slower. All right, so that's a look at how to work with CATMotion. So I would highly recommend you experimenting with those properties that we've used to make a really cool walk in the end you could use for your characters down your pipeline.